And I've interviewed Alex Honnold, who free soloed El Cap, Laird Hamilton, big wave surfer. Like, I've interviewed all these athletes, and like the belief is that we're fearless. That is absolutely not true. What it is we love feeling fear. We love it. It makes us feel so alive.
I'm Heather Grish, and this is the Wisdom of the Body podcast. This podcast explores the idea of body intelligence as the real key to learning the knowledge of life, or what we call Ayurveda in the ancient language of Sanskrit. We do that by connecting with today's creative leaders and experts who will help you listen to your body, trust your gut, and live in deeper harmony with nature. Come join me as we unlock the golden door to clear, direct perception and become very deep listeners. You can find the Wisdom of the Body podcast on Apple, Spotify, and Stitcher. You can also follow us by joining my email at heathergrish.com or on Instagram at heathergrish. I know you're going to love this podcast, so take a second right now to subscribe. Do you hate fear or love it? I wanted to speak with today's guest because anxiety is such a huge issue for a lot of people. I'm sometimes surprised by the things people get anxiety about, as well as some of the things that they're really comfortable with. My guest today is doing really provocative work in this area. In fact, she's a fear expert. In Ayurvedic medicine, anxiety, fear, and even some of the emotions that we would associate positively, such as intense joy, for example, they're lumped under the category of increased vata, or an imbalance of air and space elements, or too much movement. Vata imbalance is associated with a host of physiological issues, such as dry, rough skin, erratic functioning. My guest today knows very well in her gut. She may be using a different word, but she knows it very well. As humans, we have different ways of knowing, everything from direct perception to simply believing in the authoritative testimony of another. My guest today learned about fear on the ground rather than in an academic setting, and that makes her a uniquely embodied expert. We can't heal what we don't touch. Is fear not the ultimate thing we run from? I'm Heather Grish, and you're listening to the Wisdom of the Body podcast. My guest today is Kristen Ulmer. Kristen Ulmer is a thought leader on fear and anxiety who seeks to radically challenge existing norms around the subject of this deeply misunderstood emotion. Having an education unlike no other, Kristen spent 15 years being labeled fearless by the outdoor industry. Named the best woman extreme skier in the world for 12 of those years, and voted the most fearless woman athlete in North America. Rounding out her experience, she also draws from 15 years intently studying a Zen approach to fear and anxiety. The author of The Art of Fear, she facilitates courses, events, and individuals around the world. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kristen.
I love the name of your podcast, The Wisdom of the Body, because that's also where you find fear, which is in the body. So this could also be the wisdom of fear.
Ooh, yes. Let's talk about all of this today. I'm so excited to have you here, and you're an amazing person to me. And when I just think about the work that you have done in your life, whether it's, skiing down some incredibly scary slope that I would probably pee my pants coming down, or, the work that you've been doing with people to get in touch with their fear and learn how to, I don't know, you'll have to tell me what you help them learn how to do with it, because that also sounds very intriguing. But, I don't personally get a lot of anxiety. And that's one of the reasons that I was really intrigued to speak with you. And I do at times, and certainly listening to you speak about the things that you do somehow gives me anxiety. But in my day-to-day life, I'm not a person who has a lot of it. And that probably is also like a little bit weird, because I feel like most people, at least most of my clients, have anxiety. So I really want to understand what that mechanism is from your perspective. And one of the reasons I really wanted to bring you on the podcast today. So to start, I'd love to hear from you how your process on becoming a fear and anxiety expert.
Okay, and make sure that we come back to the conversation about you not having a lot of anxiety, but your listeners do. So I was a big mountain extreme skier. And what does the word extreme mean? Extreme means you're risking your life. The consequences of failure are death or at least injury. And that's what I did on a daily basis for a decade and a half is I risked my life for a living and, had to be really, really on point, doing incredibly scary things, making life or death decisions, sometimes on a moment by moment basis. And so that's how kind of I started becoming fascinated with fear because people called me fearless. I felt fearless, but in reflection since, I realized that that is absolutely not true. I just had a relationship with fear that I had the great fortune of learning when I was a young girl that most people don't have the great opportunity to learn. So I have then studied a Zen approach to fear. Like I said, I've worked with 10,000 clients now, give a lot of talks, wrote this book. I'm writing another book about anxiety. And make no mistake, anxiety is fear. We've stopped calling it fear for some reason. Now we just call it anxiety, right? And it's a more PC word, politically correct word. Nobody wants to think of themselves as being fearful, but they are okay with seeing themselves as being anxious. Like the Wall Street guy would never say, I'm pickled in fear, right? That would be humiliating. But he says, I'm pickled in anxiety. And we nod our head knowingly, like, well, of course, you're working on Wall Street. So, anyway, so we're talking about fear. We're talking about anxiety. Specifically, anxiety is recirculating fear that's stuck in your system, going round and round when there's no more perceived threat. And 33 years, I have made this my life's work to put the pieces of the puzzle together about why some people have issues with fear and anxiety, why other people don't, what's the difference. And I realize now that my ski career was only that, just an education for me to put this puzzle together. So I had a lot of fun and it was incredible and it was a huge ego trip and all that. But really, for me, it just was an education to bring to the world what I've learned from my past and Zen and clients. So here we are.
Awesome. Yeah, I once heard you say that you learned about fear on the ground rather than in an academic setting. And I love this because, I get a lot of medical doctors that come to me in my practice. So, this idea that when we're trained academically in something, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to embody the teachings that we're receiving intellectually in that setting. And oftentimes, the things that we learn the best are the things that no one taught us, but that we discovered ourselves. So, I really love you coming from this perspective and the process that you went through to get there. It feels like it must be an extremely embodied process.
Can I pause you for a moment there? Because I want to really bring in a very interesting kind of sexy point here. What I have been sharing with the world regarding fear and anxiety is actually the radical opposite of what you're going to hear from doctors, self-help gurus, psychologists. Doctors, psychologists, self-help gurus are oftentimes just parroting or repeating information that they learned either academically or from their teacher or, basically what people are learning, most experts are just repeating the same thing that everybody else is repeating in one category. And they're trying to help people and they're very well intended and very well meaning. And there is scientific data to prove that the things that they're teaching actually help people feel better. But for the most part, temporary band-aids or temporary solutions that only make people feel better for a moment or for a day, but actually cause worse fear and anxiety long term. And so me coming at it from the ground up, from personal experience, what I've come up with is the radical opposite of what else is being taught out there. Like I didn't come to the same conclusions of the things that have been passed down for generation after generation. This is completely new information, completely original, what I've come up with. And let's get to it because I think people are going to find some real concrete, different out of the box answers the further down the rabbit hole we go today.
Oh, that's awesome. I really, really, really appreciate you saying that. And one of the things I wanted to bring up is how Ayurveda looks at fear and anxiety. And even in Ayurveda, people oftentimes come to holistic medicines because they have some sort of distrust of the conventional medical system, or they went there and it didn't help them. Probably a lot of the same reasons that people come to you, right? Because you're an unconventional type of healer. And what happens even in Ayurveda is that you have people that are very prescriptive and, this is the problem, this is the solution. And I think what you're talking about is different than that, because healing is really something that's different than problem and solution mindsets. And it's like the same problems that happen in a doctor's office can also happen when somebody goes to a holistic healer, because if they think it's the medicine that's healing them, then we still have the problem. So I would love to hear from you about some of the methods that you use to help people work with fear.
I am very solution oriented as well, but it's not one size fits all, but there are some commonalities. I'm what's known as an industry disruptor. And out there in the world, people say, okay, if you have an anxiety disorder, what do they say? Well, you should meditate, do yoga, get outside in nature, go exercise, think positive thoughts, breathe in calm, breathe out your anxiety. I do not recommend any of those things as treatment for anxiety. And I'm sure the audience is like, what? That's crazy. Like, these things make me feel so much better. But yoga is not meant to be treatment for anxiety. Getting outside in nature or exercising is not meant to be treatment for anxiety. It cheapens these things. And they're just Band-Aids. Of course, if you get out and exercise in nature, you're going to feel better, but it's a way to kind of not deal with the problem. We see it as ways to deal with your fear and anxiety, but it's actually ways to not deal with your fear and anxiety for another day, to the point where people just get addicted to meditation 2, 3, 5 times a day just to get through a day, or they have to have yoga or else they come unglued, or if they don't get to exercise, their life comes unraveled. So again, these things are not meant to be treatment. They're just Band-Aids. What I recommend instead is dealing with the issue from the bottom up. First of all, understanding exactly if somebody has an issue with fear or anxiety, why that is. Why do they have it when other people don't? The second thing is we need to kind of change our perspective, how we view fear, how we view anxiety. And then as for the kind of practical solution that I'm all about, it's a matter of doing the exact opposite of what you've been doing. If you have an anxiety disorder, if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting for results, we call that insanity, right? So we need to go sane. We need to kind of back up, reassess, and start actually heading in the exact opposite direction of the things that we've been doing. And that's not to say you don't do yoga or you don't meditate, but that should be step B. Step A is go back to the roots, understand what the issue is. And instead of using these as a way to kind of get through a moment or a day, first have a practice that resolves the issue, and then go back to the yoga and meditation and realize that it takes on an entirely new meaning.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So the way I hear that is that all of the sort of treatment methods that people would use, whether it's yoga or whether it's herbal stuff or, whatever people do, taking a Valium or whatever anybody does to manage their anxiety or meditate 5 times a day, like you said, that those are all just sort of like palliative measures to sort of cover up that there's some actual issue going on. So tell me, Kristen, why do you think some people have fear and anxiety and others don't?
Well, let's go back to you, because you say that you don't have a lot of anxiety. So that means one of two things. Either you're doing something really, really right, or you're doing something really, really wrong. And I'm sure you're like, what? What does that mean? Well, I didn't have any fear during my ski career. And by any stretch of the imagination, I was celebrated for it. People would probably look to me and say, oh, she knows what's up with fear. She knows what to do. Well, I did some things right by fear, and I did some things wrong by fear. And so if somebody has no fear, no anxiety, that might be a good sign. It might also be a bad sign. So listen up. I'm going to give you an exact definition of why some people struggle with fear and anxiety and why others don't. And it'll all make really real clean sense to you very soon. So we have this thing called the amygdala, 2 almond-shaped nuggets at the top of the spine, determining safe or not safe. It's the manufacturing plant for fear. And all data is run through this primary filter first as it comes into your system. And if there's a perceived threat, the amygdala, which is not a thought-producing part of the brain, there's no thoughts involved. It's just a manufacturing plant for emotion. So it'll manufacture a burst of fear and emotion, and it's proven by science. It shows up in your body, and it flows through your body, into, through, and out of your life And it'll stay there so long as the perceived threat continues to exist, and lead to either freeze, just to like kind of get your act together, like, okay, what's going on, right? Or fight, which kind of looks like anger. Most of what we see as modern anger is actually fear, like bringing your A game to, like a mama bear, who rears up and she looks angry, but really she's afraid. She's afraid you're going to hurt her cub or something. So that's fight or flight. Like, I'm out of here. I'm not going to do this, right? I'm not going to do this podcast today. And that's the fear response. And it's supposed to lead to physical action without thought. We see this in animals. They're a beautiful example of this. So humans were a lot more complicated than animals. So what have we done to disrupt this very natural, very wise kind of fear process? It's like the universe is giving us like this operating manual on how to deal with almost every situation. Well, the thing is, to the amygdala, everything is a perceived threat. And as a result, fear is with us pretty much all the time. And us humans, we're a little alarmed by this. We do not like to feel discomfort. We see it as a problem to be solved. And so next thing you know, instead of fighting or fleeing the situation, we're fighting or fleeing the fear itself. Like, we're in our heads about it, trying to understand it, trying to control it, trying to breathe it away, trying to replace it with positivity. Parents that say to their kids, make it a great day, or there's nothing to be afraid of, like, send a message that it's not okay to feel fear. It's not even real. It's false evidence appearing real. Like, next thing you know, we fear shame each other and we disrupt the process. We're like, okay, how do I get rid of this feeling? Here's this wonderful energy, this wonderful emotion coming through our bodies, helping us be on point. And we're now trying to conquer or overcome it. The language. We're at war against it, thus at war against our own bodies, our own systems. We're at war against nature even. And that's what causes problems, because then what happens is we kink the flow of the fear. And imagine a kinked hose. Like, imagine your body like the fear's water through a hose. You kink the hose in your body, and all of a sudden that fear just pools and backs up. This is anxiety. And I found that anxiety, and this brings in you, Heather, will show up, or the fear, the kinked fear, the stuck fear in your system will show up in one of three ways. So somebody could not feel any fear or not feel any anxiety. This will explain why. So either it'll show up as kind of excessive anxiety, like an anxiety disorder, or irrational fear, or just a lot of fear. Or it'll show up redirected in other ways. Like, somebody says, well, I don't feel any fear at all, but I have an anger issue, or I'm depressed. So the fear can get really clever. And if you don't have any willingness to feel the fear, well, you got to feel something. You're going to feel anger or sadness instead. Kind of like the kid who has a really scary home life. He doesn't seem afraid. He seems angry, or they get depressed. Or the third way it'll show up hijacking your mind. Because when water gets kind of trapped in a closed system, it'll start to flood in every available space. And next thing you know, you'll have fearful thoughts. So then you may have insomnia, or you may have kind of a looping, irrational fear response in your brain. And to the point where if you have any kind of issue in your life, it doesn't matter what it is. It could be emotional, mental, spiritual, psychological, physical even. If you kink the flow of fear in your body, it will show up in one way or another. And so you may not feel anxiety, but you may have a whole host of other issues instead. You may get sick a lot. You may be in your head all the time so that you don't have to deal with the feelings in your body. Be a really controlling person, because if you get really good at controlling fear, what do you have to become in order to do that? And so any kind of issue you have in your life is somehow either directly or indirectly tied back to how much you're in flow with fear or not in flow with fear.
I love the intuitive understanding that you have in a real sort of body centered. I mean, when I listen to you speak about it, I really get the sense that you're envisioning the energy moving through a person's body. And it's so interesting because a lot of what you're saying is so similar to what Ayurveda actually teaches about how energy moves through the body. And we call them doshas. This comes from India. And basically, it's the vata dosha, which is the air and the space elements. When there's an increase of that is the fear and the anxiety mechanism that comes up. And what's interesting is that it's considered, at least in Ayurvedic medicine, to be the root which I think you have this really intuitive understanding of the root of all other types of imbalances in the body, because it's essentially just energy moving. So let me sort of summarize what I'm hearing, because I want to make sure that I'm really understanding you, because I know this is really, really embodied for you. When you're saying that there's the fight, flight, freeze thing, so there's the feeling of the fear, and then you're saying that we shouldn't do anything about it. Are you saying that people should just feel the fear? Is that what I'm getting, or send me in the right direction?
Yes. And, right now we're so messed up about what to do about fear that we're back in our heads trying to figure it out. And I understand that. And so let me just help everybody understand like a proper fear response versus an improper fear response. And I did both during my ski career. So I'll go back to my ski career. I did some things right by fear and I did some things wrong by fear. I mentioned that. I had what I would call a paradox going on, where I both loved feeling fear and hated feeling fear at the same time. And anyone who's married will say that, yes, that's possible. You can love and hate somebody at the same time. Like, look at fear as a person. And like, first of all, to call me fearless during my ski career is ludicrous. My entire motivation was because of fear. And when we start to break it down, we can start to see how fear influences us and our own motivations. Like, I had fear of being invisible, fear of not being loved, fear of not being special. That's what got me to jump off 100-foot cliffs, right? So my fear is what drove me, is what motivated me. Fear is a great motivator, especially when you're young. It's like hot fire, burning fuel. I was also very afraid of injury and death and afraid of failure. And so that fear actually helped me bring my A game to everything that I did, to be on point and make really sharp decisions. I loved feeling fear. Fear and excitement neurochemically are exactly the same thing. And I didn't feel fear. What I felt was excitement, aliveness. So those are kind of the things that I did right by fear. And people call people like me adrenaline addicts back then. Well, really, because there has to be fear before there's adrenaline, what we are is we're fear addicts. We love feeling fear. And I've interviewed Alex Honnold, free soloed El Cap, Laird Hamilton, big wave surfer. Like, I've interviewed all these athletes, and like the belief is that we're fearless. That is absolutely not true. What it is we love feeling fear. We love it. It makes us feel so alive. So that's what I got right. And I also had an intimate relationship with the fear when it showed up. And thus it didn't feel uncomfortable. It just felt like sharp aliveness, focus. Extreme sports are notorious for taking people into the zone. Why is that? It's because of the fear and because of the fact that we love feeling it. We have that intimacy with the fear, and it takes us into that heightened state of awareness called flow or the zone, and little else does. Like, when you're afraid and you have an intimate relationship with fear, flow comes for free. That's the big picture, like, healthy relationship with fear, where it's just in your body. I'll say this also, and because we're willing to meet it in our bodies and become intimate with it, like great sex, right? Like, imagine like you and your lover just kind of giving and receiving from each other at the same time. That's what the experience was like for me. And I remained in my body, which is a better place from which to perform than my head. So that's a healthy relationship with fear. And of course, I don't expect people to relate to 100-foot cliff jumps or big wave surfing or free soloing El Cap, but even just little things like giving a speech or a job interview or having a difficult conversation with your husband or wife, like, that's scary too. Can you have an intimate relationship with it and stay in your body? And then you can speak from your body and live from your body. And in my case, perform from my body, which is a better place from which to perform, especially as an athlete, than your head.
If you are convinced that you really don't want to struggle the way so many other people seem to be struggling with their health and fertility, I welcome you to visit my website, heathergrish.com, and explore booking an online Ayurvedic consultation with me. Whether you are looking to improve your health for yourself or because you want to have a baby, there has never been a more perfect time to do it. Every day you wait matters, and there's likely something available for you right now that you aren't receiving. If you know it's your time, book an online Ayurvedic consultation today before the sun sets again. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. Yeah, no, Kristen, I really wish I could have hired you to be my birth doula. I feel like you would have really helped me through that process.
So that's a healthy relationship with fear.
Yeah.
The unhealthy relationship with fear, I also did, because I was stepping way out of my comfort zone, where there exists a lot of fear. And so I was really good at ignoring it. And I do not recommend this, but it worked for me to just be blank. It's like when I did something really, really dangerous, like a big cliff jump that was way out of my comfort zone, I became kind of like you imagine a shark to be, just blank and kind of big black eyes and dead inside and like no thoughts and just, right? And it worked. But the thing is, that was my version of resistance to fear. And there are 7.5 billion different people, 7.5 billion different ways to resist feeling fear. My version was I ignored it. Other people try to control it. Other people try to understand it as a way to control it. Other people drink alcohol so they don't have to deal with it, or take pills, or smoke a lot of pot so they don't have to deal with the fear, and on and on. Eat a lot of food. Like, there's so many different ways to not deal with fear.
I'm so curious about this way that you describe this sort of unhealthy relationship and the image that you gave of you with the sort of blank eyes. If our awareness is, like a flashlight going in different directions, it could go into the body, outside the body, simultaneously, it could be in and out at the same time. Did you feel like you were in your body in those moments?
It more felt like, because I had a paradox going on, I had both at the same time. I was choosing to do something incredibly scary. So I actually was putting myself in a place where I would feel a lot of fear, but then it would be so much that I had to just shut myself down. And I just became empty. And on the one hand, like that really good kind of Buddhist, juicy emptiness, where there's a lot there, or just kind of like a shark, which, I mean, the reason why I use the analogy of a shark is because I just had to become so tough. Like my form of compensation, and this is one way that a lot of people don't deal with their fear, or deal with their fear, however you want to call it, is they become really arrogant and masculine and just kind of simple, or numb is another way. So I became arrogant, masculine, numb.
Yeah, and I can relate to that.
There was also that kind of emptiness. Yeah.
I can, because I'm not nearly the kind of athlete that you are, but I was an athlete growing up and things like that. So I get that. I understand that mechanism. I've had that myself. And I guess I'm just sort of trying to wonder, because we want fear, right? Because fear is actually an energy that is animating, that is enlivening, that is wonderful in the right doses and the right frequencies and things like that. And when our body's in the right condition.
Well, hold
Yeah.
on. Let me just stop you there. If you had put a period after that first part, like, energy, and it heightens our senses, and maybe add in some intuition, instinct, period. The second we start saying in the right doses, or if it's the right kind, and people start talking about good fear and bad fear, just make no mistake. There is no good or bad fear. There's only fear. It's very, very simple.
Mm.
And it's only a good thing, period. And if it gets to be heightened or too much, that's our fault, not fear's fault. We've done something wrong that has messed up the system such that it's now acting weird, or showing up in our heads, or showing up as an anxiety disorder,
Yeah, that's really more about what I meant, is that if like we look at our body like it's a channel that holds energy, and if the channel is sort of like compromised in some way because we didn't sleep the night before, or we've been eating, popcorn for every meal for 2 weeks, and we have no mucus membrane left anywhere in our body to be able to sort of ground that energy to come through it, that those are the kinds of things that I was thinking would be an example of when we wouldn't be able to handle as much of a dose of the fear.
Well, it's also that fear is going to be elevated. Like if you're abusing your body, of course, you're going to have more fear. But who doesn't love popcorn? So we can't be on point and perfect all the time. And I definitely am not one of those people. But if we can simplify it, yes, some days you're going to have a lot more fear. It might have something to do with your diet, or the fact that you haven't been exercising, or, that you're just kind of checking out for a couple of days. And other times we have less. Sometimes we're in the mood for fear because we're in the mood to learn and grow. And sometimes we're not in the mood for fear. The only stuck place is when we're just stagnant. We're never in the mood for fear. There's a lot of people who are fear avoiders. They never want to leave their comfort zone. They blame fear for holding them back when really they should blame themselves for holding themselves back because they're unwilling to feel fear. When we're stuck in one place, like there's a saying in Zen, like if you only wear Prada, you're stuck. If you only wear Birkenstocks, you're stuck. But if you wear Prada one day and you wear Birkenstocks the next day, then you're not stuck.
I love that. I love it. Yeah, I
Yep.
mean, you have so many great tools from, just your experience and your Zen training. And I heard you talk in an interview online about this sort of analogy of being the father to 10,000 children as a tool to help people in this area. Could you talk a little bit about that analogy? And because I found that really funny when you were talking about this analogy, because I actually had a client who was born thanks to a sperm donor. And she was like the child of a mom who'd gotten pregnant with a sperm donor. And she later found out in her life that she was one of 16 children that had been born from this one sperm donor. So I was like laughing when I heard the father of the 10,000 children, because there could possibly be someone out there with that. But tell us about your idea and your analogy.
Okay. The traditional number in Zen is 10,000. We have 10,000 states of being. So imagine that you're a parent with 10,000 children. And this really explains why anxiety disorders are growing at an alarming number in our culture. I think we're at 18.1%. And those are just the ones who are willing to admit it, and it's even worse in places like Iceland, believe it or not. And despite all these methods and modalities, anxiety disorders are only getting worse and worse. And we're kind of headed towards the path where pretty soon we're all going to be medicated if we don't stop this. So this analogy really explains why. And it's kind of starts with desire for positivity, which is really popular right now. Like everybody has a gratitude practice. We all want to fill our hearts with love and joy. Well, buyer beware, because that is actually what's causing the anxiety crisis we face today. So listen up. Here's the analogy. So imagine that you have a house full of children, 10,000 children, and God forbid, but half your children you've named love, joy, gratitude, forgiveness. And the other half of your children you've named fear, anger, sadness, resentment. Despite your best intention, would you be able to treat them all the same way? Probably not. And certainly in our culture, like we prioritize these wonderful children, and we feed and we love and we nurture them and show them off to the world. Like, look at how filled with joy and love I am, and then there's these other children over here, the bad children. What do we do with them? We fight them. We try to conquer, overcome them. We try to replace them with the good children whenever they show up. Like, I don't want to listen to you. I want to listen to calm, right? And we put duct tape over their mouths and we lock them in the basement. We throw away the key. And here we are on the surface living our lives, filled with joy in our heart and love and gratitude. Well, what do you think is happening in the basement? They're burning the house down. They will not be denied. And, the voice of, I call them voices too, like anger. You do not want to piss anger off. Back to what I was saying, anger locked in the basement as a child. Like, imagine how angry that child is being locked in the basement. Next thing you know, anger is just screaming from the basement and just desperately trying to get out. So this analogy shows that when we just kind of focus on the positive, make it a great day, create your own reality, we deny the negative its rightful place in our lives. And imagine that these really are people, and you have a child that's upset, has something to say, and you ignore them and you lock them in the basement. Eventually that child will become we'd like to think atrophied, or eventually they'll die and go away, but that's not what happens. Let's say a kid at 4 years old says to mom, and now I'm going back into real life, says to mom, I feel afraid. Mom says there's nothing to be afraid of. You need to put that fear away. Well, the kid at age 4 locks his fear in the basement. That fear is now only developed to the age of a 4-year-old. So that as that 4-year-old kid turns into an adult, their fear or their anger or their sadness will show up in a very, very childlike way because they've been locked in the basement for so long. And I found that you can lock a emotion in the basement for about 10 years tops, and then all of a sudden it starts to just terrorize your life, either in an obvious way, as an exaggerated version of itself, or in a covert way, showing up redirected in other ways that don't even seem like the emotion itself. And so there's 2 ways to live your life, where you're only willing to align yourself with the positive, And people think that that's Zen. It's the funniest thing. Like the image of the monk meditating on the cushion, all blissed out, like it's hard to shake.
I call myself a recovering yoga teacher, so I really appreciate what you're saying.
Thank you.
I don't teach anymore. I do like some things with clients, but yeah, I actually felt that way. And I think that now there's this whole term called spiritual bypassing. You've probably come across that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, I really appreciate what you're saying. And I'm actually envisioning you because I haven't worked with you one on one. And I know you've facilitated groups with some people that I know as well. And I'm curious. I'm just envisioning you. I'm envisioning you sitting, like essentially forcing somebody to have a conversation with all those children that have been locked in the basement. So tell me how you have people get in touch with this.
Well, it's a few steps. First of all, awareness is power. It used to be said that knowledge is power, but we have Google now, so awareness is power. And it's actually the new superpower in business too, just having a sense of self and why I act the way I act. So getting to know your unique relationship with fear, that child called fear, is absolutely the first place to start because everybody is so different. I had my paradox going on during my ski career. And I'll finish by saying I was really good at ignoring fear, like ignoring that child. And it lasted for about 10 years. And then all of a sudden, my life just started to come unraveled. And no, I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel anxiety. But all of a sudden, I had PTSD and I had sleep issues. And I started to hate skiing. Like, what was that all about? I didn't feel anxiety, but my repression or resistance to fear in the form of ignoring it was showing up for me in my life in those other weird, wacky ways. So, first of all, just getting to know your unique relationship with fear, like learning that I had a paradox going on, blew my mind. And all of a sudden everything can be explained. And the part of me that ignored fear was causing all sorts of problems, including injuries, because I had to become really rigid and stoic, in order to block out fear. And in a sport as violent as extreme skiing, you need to be a little more slinky like. So I started breaking more. So getting to know your unique relationship with fear is absolutely where I start, like raising your antenna, because then all of a sudden, so many of your behaviors can be explained. And then the second step is start talking about fear in an optimistic way instead of a pessimistic way, not only to yourself, but certainly to your children and to your friends. And what that looks like is imagine that you're talking about a human being. Like one time I was about to give a speech and, my mom knows what I teach, but she gets a little goofy sometimes. She has mild dementia. And I'm about to give a speech, a long one, in front of a prestigious audience. And she said, "How are you feeling?" I said, "I feel really scared." And she said, "Oh, no, no, there's nothing to be afraid of. You don't need to feel fear." I'm like, "Mom, shut up." Right? So we need to stop fear shaming each other.
Yeah. And it starts really young because I have a 3-year-old. He's 3.5. And what I started to notice with parenting is that when a kid falls on the playground, the parents that go, "You're okay. You're okay." And I'm like, oh my God, why are you telling the kid? Why are you telling him he's okay? I don't do that. It really bothers me when people do that. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yes, it's very similar. Like I had a client who had a kid who had anxiety disorder and he was young and they went to the water slide, get on the water park and the water slide. And he said, "Would you like to get on?" And the kid's like, "No way." And the dad's like, "Well, there's nothing to be afraid of. See, look, grandmothers are getting on it. There's your brothers and sisters getting on it. Like it's perfectly safe. There's nothing to be afraid of," which is not true. Absolutely, there's something to be afraid of. They designed it to be scary. That's what makes it so fun. So it makes that kid mistrust his emotions and feel like he's not going to get dad's love unless he gets rid of the fear. And he's embarrassed about himself that he even feels it. And I mean, imagine what kind of future that kid has with that kind of message. Parents well intended, but you have got to resist the urge to kind of fear shame people. What the parent should have said is, "Yes, it is really scary. That's what makes it so fun." So the
Mm,
question is, are you in the mood for fear today? And then the
mm.
kid can say, "Well, I'm not in the mood for fear today." I'm like, "Okay, let's not go on the water slide then. And let me know if you change your mind, if you're in the mood for fear."
I love that. And I do kind of something a little different where I say, "Hey, how does that feel? Like, does your belly hurt?" Or I try to get him to like pay attention to how he feels it in his body. But I love that suggestion. I'm getting so many good ideas from you on, on how to deal with myself and also my kid, to be honest.
Right. And have there be a period after that sentence. Where does it feel? Where do you feel it? Is it in your belly? Resist the urge to put a comma and then say, okay, now let's let it go and get on the water slide. Because fear is not meant to be let go of. It's not like CO2. It's more like food or blood. It's meant to be there as an energy resource, or it's meant to be digested, and meant to be tapped into. Like you plus fear equals super you. So you don't want to let that go. And the other thing I'll say about changing your language is talking about fear in an optimistic way. Fear does not hold anybody back. It's our unwillingness to feel fear that holds us back. Notice the difference between the two. Fear actually doesn't feel bad. It's our resistance to feeling the fear that feels so bad. Speaking about fear in a positive language, it's not like if you only get one thing out of this podcast, just don't use the word fear and overcome in the same sentence ever again, right? It's not meant to be overcome or conquered, or any kind of combative language like that is really disrespectful to fear. And it puts you at war with your fear, with your own body, with the nature of life itself.
So what is the word?
Savored.
Savored, yeah.
Right? And fear is meant to be, right, savored, or, in certain contexts, like if you're about to give a speech, you're not necessarily going to savor fear, but maybe kind of used as a resource to help me be more sharp and on point, right? Right. So change your language to reflect that fear is a positive. And if you're needing help with that, just see it as a person, like if you're about to go on stage and you say, okay, you son of a bitch, I'm going to do this despite the fact that you're here, right? Not the right language. Or I'm going to feel you and do it anyway, like feel the fear and do it anyway. Get rid of the word anyway. Like I'm going to feel the fear and together we're going to do it together and it's going to be amazing. It's not about acceptance either. It's a step in the right direction, but it's not strong enough. It's about embracing, and it's about intimacy. Can you have an intimate relationship with this person in your life that lives in your body, that's there pretty much all the time, called fear? And if so, you have an intimate experience with your own body. You have an intimate experience with life itself. Don't run away from it to go exercise or do yoga or anything. Take it with you and just kind of contemplate it. Be curious about it. Like learn how to kind of enjoy it too. That's a big step that's way, way down the road from where we are right now. We need to crawl before we can walk, before we can run, but that's the ultimate goal. And if we all do this, there would be no more anxiety disorders. There would be no more depression, except for maybe situational when you're really, really sad about something. Anger would just be a lot more just problem solving, kind of energy to right or wrong. Like I would say that having a healthy flowing relationship with fear is the most important personal work you can do, because then you're a healthy person. And if we all do this, can you imagine what kind of world we would have, rather than what we're doing now, which is like we're monkeys throwing our shit at each other. We're like throwing each other, you deal with my fear. No, you deal with my fear. It's such beautiful, important work. And I've dedicated my life to it and to teaching it.
Yeah, we really do like to ask other people to make our lives easier so that we don't have to feel uncomfortable, don't we?
Yes, exactly. Like you deal with the discomfort that I feel in my body. So the first thing, awareness. Second, change your language. Third thing is start a fear practice, not a gratitude practice, or those can come later. That's plan B, right? But learn how to just be in your body and recognize your fear when it shows up and feel it and embrace it and become intimate with it. If you do this, you'll find that it's not a problem after all. It's actually a source of wisdom. And you can start to tap into, why am I having so many arguments with my spouse? Like, why does my lower back hurt so much? Why am I drinking so much? Like, if you just are willing to sit with your fear, you just watch, even 2 minutes a day, just watch how so many of the issues that you had that seemed not related to fear or anxiety in the slightest just start to resolve.
Well, on that note, I think that we've really given the listeners a lot of amazing information today, Kristen. I just want to say thank you so much for being here on the Wisdom of the Body podcast today. And could you please let everybody know how they can find you and learn more about your work?
Yes. It's KristenUlmer.com is my website, KristenUlmer. And on my homepage, I have a free fear and anxiety assessment that can help start the process of you becoming aware of what your relationship is with fear. And it just absolutely blows people's minds. So please, it's free, it's 20 fascinating questions. Start there. I also have my book, The Art of Fear, why conquering fear won't work and what to do instead. And that's a good place to get started as well.
Thank you so much for being here, Chris. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Well, thank you for your important work. I mean, getting people out of their heads and into their bodies, I think, is just so important. And it's one of the longest, most tumultuous, weirdest journeys we ever go on, but it's so worth it.
Thank you for dropping in with us today. Follow me on social media and see if you'd like to go deeper. You can find me on Instagram at Heather Grish. That's at Heather, GRZYCH. And stop by my website if you want to learn about how to listen to the wisdom of your body. If you're ready to go deeper, let's talk. You can start with booking a consultation. Perhaps we were meant to meet. Together, we'll explore how to tune in and drop in. And join me next time on the Wisdom of the Body podcast.